How about we experiment with the format a little bit for the last story this season? In what way? Well, keep the base, have an irritable boss, bring back a popular enemy, but, and here's the catch, nothing happens. They don't actually meet the Cybermen till very late on, that sort of thing. Really, nothing happens. I don't know if you can get away with that. I mean, we definitely can't have absolutely nothing happen in the first episode, for example. That's where we hook the viewer. Alright, in the first episode, what about they, I don't know, have some beef? Beef? Yeah, Jamie orders some roast beef from a food machine. Does the doctor have some? No, he has pork. Well, what do they have with their pork and beef? What? Which vegetables do they have with their pork and beef? I think we're straying a little bit too far away from the nothing that I suggested. Look, they're not just having plates of meat, alright? What vegetables do they have? I suppose cabbage with the beef? And what about with the pork? I don't know. Carrots? Potatoes? Yeah, okay. You know, I was wrong to doubt you. This sounds great! Hello, welcome back to Marathon Man, where I go through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me as we finish Season 5 by meeting some old enemies and a new friend. Now, I'll come right out and say it, I used to hate this story. Okay, so I was a little bit cheeky at the beginning of this video, but that is how I used to feel. This used to be right down at the bottom with the Celestial Toymaker for me. It was almost like an exercise in seeing how long they could sustain a crushing sense of boredom to inflict upon me. It felt scientifically designed to break me. Now, by the end of its 6th episode, not only did I used to be furious with the whole thing, not only was I relieved and proud of myself for having defeated it, but the worst thing was that the paint in episode 1 was still nowhere near dry by the time they decided to sit down and watch a repeat of The Evil of the Daleks. Season 5 brings with it many instances of deja vu anyway, but at least they had the good grace to sort of package everything up. I mean, to try and make it look slightly differently, but also to wrap it all up in a story with at least some entertaining incident. But this one just seemed to think that it was enough to have a base and some Cybermen, and that that's enough to make a Doctor Who story. But this time around, and I don't really know why, I actually found it passed by quite agreeably. Now, I'm not saying it's like super strong, but considering how I used to think about it, it is a huge improvement. And with Fury from the Deep being a massive step up this time around as well, I actually find that this is the most I've ever enjoyed Season 5. And while I used to be super down on that first episode where nothing happened, and it felt like such a torturously long time for them to order food from that food machine, even though I used to feel like that, an abandoned rocket is a really eerie setting to start a Doctor Who story and for the Doctor and Jamie to find themselves on. And that really worked for me this time around. I, for some reason, bought into it. And I don't know why. I used to think that food machine thing lasted about 3 hours. And this time it was like, oh, okay. Still, I think we needed their full orders, though. And because it feels really painstaking the way that they order their dinner, I was, again, filled with the apprehension that I had before. Never really enjoying this story means that I wasn't super excited about getting to this point on the marathon, and I did have a sense of dread, but not in the way the story wanted me to, because if they're padding this early on, that's never a good sign, and so I braced myself. But like I say, maybe because this time I was prepared for it, it didn't actually feel as egregious this time around, and I actually found that episode 1 sort of built quite nicely. Gives them a chance to talk about Victoria. And while I used to be willing the story to get a move on, because look, let's face it, the first episode is not where a story should be dawdling, this time it did feel more like they were trying to generate a sense of unease. And while I still don't think it was entirely successful, I can at least appreciate that's what they were going for. I appreciated the attempt far more than I used to. Seeing other people comes as a relief and helps break it all up a bit. But even then they don't have particularly stimulating conversations. At one point somebody utters the phrase,
"There's definitely a repetitive order to it."
No kidding. But the thing is, normally I used to audibly tut at that line, but this time I just sort of laughed at it. It's almost as if, I don't know, I felt like almost a little protective of the wheel in space this time. It's almost as if the story doesn't know any better and I should just stop being a git to it. Following in the footsteps of Season 5's roll call of base commanders, here we have Jarvis. Now, not to put too fine a point on it, but I used to think Jarvis was absolutely dreadful. I still maintain he's by far the stupidest of the people in charge this season has had. And after stronger personalities like Clint and Robson, he does pale in comparison. But what's changed is that where I used to think he wasn't particularly well performed, this time I see no fault whatsoever in Michael Turner's performance. The faults that I detect in Jarvis are more to do with the fact that he's basically just a cookie-cutter archetype of, Season 5's roster of base commanders. What Jarvis is good at is brushing up against the Doctor. Troughton has become very adept at railing against base leaders who don't believe him. As this isn't exactly his first time doing that this season, you'd expect that to be the case, and Jarvis gives him more than one opportunity. So while the character does feel derivative, it really brings out some good stuff from Troughton. Gemma is a good egg though, and at least makes for one decent supporting character. However, just as I was starting to warm up to the wheel in space, it then promptly gets rid of her. If one wasn't to know and was trying to guess and had become familiar with this sort of like pattern of losing a companion and then introducing a new one, you might be forgiven for thinking that they're setting Gemma or even Tanya up as Victoria's replacement. And truth be told, I'd have been happy with either. Tanya may not get to do much, but she shows potential that she could stretch her legs and fit right in. Gemma, however, would be a more fitting candidate of the two. She's slightly older, but Troughton has a similar chemistry with her as he had with Anne, and goes to show that he could have been given a slightly older woman to travel with. The dynamic would have rung the changes, but still been very watchable. It's a moot point anyway, because our new companion, fairly obviously, is Zoe. And she's the best candidate out of the three anyway. She sparks off Jamie really well instantly from the off, and I really like the three of them together. She is a really intriguing character and on paper actually has more about her than most recent companions. The idea that she's sort of like a sexy little Spock may sound daft on paper, but I'm of the opinion it actually translates quite well. When she's told that she's all brain and no heart, it's probably, spoilers for the end of this video, the highlight of the episode. It's a good idea for a companion, and Wendy Padbury reacts in exactly the right way. She is affronted by the suggestion, but is, for obvious reasons, unemotional about it. It works really well, and it's a thread which isn't abandoned, because when she later discloses that she's actually worried about this being the case, and not being able to develop her emotions, it's a really nice moment. At one point, she delivers the news,
"The meteorites! They're heading straight for us!"
really dispassionately. Considering that is the cliffhanger line and she just throws it away as if it's a bit of admin, all end up in me liking Zoe an awful lot. What becomes apparent, and something I never used to give this story credit for, is that it seems to be putting more effort into developing Zoe than into anything else. This means that I end up taking to Zoe very quickly, and therefore it's successful in that. And while yes, certain elements of the story do suffer, it is hugely important to make a good job of introducing the new regular. Her crisis of identity also feeds into the reasons for her wanting to join the Doctor and Jamie, and that's set up far better than anything else in the Wheel in Space might suggest that it's capable of. Because yes, while I am kind of waxing lyrical about how it introduces Zoe to the show, the story itself is still very, very thin. Because here we have the Cybermen again. They started off brilliantly. I might not think much of the 10th Planet, but the Cybermen themselves are just brilliant in it. Their next story was a better one, but they themselves lost a little something. And their next story was better yet, but they remained inferior to their debut showing. And then we have this, a story which is indeed a come down from their previous two, but which also contains the worst Cybermen yet as well. Sorry, terrible voices this time, and there is nothing here which is particularly necessary for them to actually be Cybermen. The power of the Daleks justified the presence of the Daleks in such a way that it didn't feel like a gratuitous resurrection of a cultural phenomenon. And the Tomb of the Cybermen did, I think, pretty much exactly the same thing with the Cybermen. But the Wheel in Space kind of creaks under the weight of how obvious it is that they've kind of just gone, throw some Cybermen at it. A really poor appearance for them, and now I find it hard to think of them as anything other than just like utterly diminished. For a time, they were eclipsing the Daleks for me as monsters and as villains. Whereas now, they're just underwhelming me with each subsequent appearance, which is, you know, it's a shame. They also hatch from eggs now. Once they are on the wheel and causing havoc, you'd think this story would step up, but it doesn't, and it continues a fairly sedate pace with all too familiar Season 5 trappings. So in essence, I spend a story with Cybermen on the loose, willing something interesting to happen. A colossal misfire for the Cybermen. However, despite these shortcomings, which I still can't really overlook, I did find more to enjoy in The Wheel in Space than I ever have before. Jamie and Zoe stuck in space with asteroids hurtling towards them is a very, very tense scene. Plus, Troughton brings his A-game, which is the mark of a true pro. Now, the Doctor not wanting to get out of bed and just keep enjoying his rest would, in any other story, be absolutely wonderful. And Troughton does perform it absolutely perfectly. He's a joy to watch, as always. The reason that, as a bit of business, it doesn't really hit the spot for me in this story is because it's kind of another example of like indolence and a sedentary pace that this story really suffers from, and it just ends up being an obstacle, another obstacle in the way of much action actually happening. Far more alarming, and therefore I guess successful in eliciting a reaction, is when the Doctor says he'd be quite willing to sacrifice Jamie and Zoe to save many more lives. Now, this is quite obviously a hero looking at the bigger picture, no matter how heartbreaking it is, and considering all the options and having to do things, you know, that he has to do rather than wants to do. But it is an arresting moment because it kind of gives you like a shock, and it makes you remember that, oh yeah, the Doctor can be very single-minded and also quite frightening. And his face-off with the Cybermen, which by the way doesn't come until the end of episode 6, is still gives him a lot of really good Doctor moments, and I don't think Troughton at this point is capable of turning in a bad performance as the Doctor. He is fantastic. After 5 seasons and 209 episodes, my enthusiasm for the marathon used to wane at this point in quite a significant way. Fury from the Deep and The Wheel in Space used to be a 1-2 of crushing disappointment, but now both of those stories this time around have endeared themselves to me for the first time, and, you know, quite considerably. Fury from the Deep used to be, you know, I on my last marathon I ranked that 2 out of 5, and obviously on this marathon I ranked it 4 out of 5. That's an increase of 100%. It's doubled. This one I used to rank it 1 out of 5, and you'll see what increase it has in a minute. The introduction of Zoe is another thing to G me up. I really, really like her in this story, and season 6 has some absolutely brilliant elements, and so I'm more keen than ever actually to crack on. And it's lovely that this point in the marathon, which used to feel like a little bit of a desert and I'm crawling through it to get sustenance, didn't feel like that this time around. Zoe Herriot. I don't think since Vicky have I taken to a new companion this quickly. And her concerns about being emotionally challenged are a great idea for a companion, and they are beautifully realised here, mostly by Wendy Padbury, but I will also give credit to the script for it as well. Worst Cybermen yet. An increase of 300%. It has tripled from 1 star to 3. And it feels weird to actually award The Wheel in Space this much, considering my long-standing relationship with it. But hey, while it feels weird, I'm not complaining. I want to love Doctor Who. And while I didn't love The Wheel in Space, you know, finding it alright, liking it this much, is a huge victory for me. And it's also a further indication that this particular marathon that I'm doing on YouTube, the one that you are watching, is the marathon that I have enjoyed the most. And it's so nice that next time around I won't be dreading reaching the latter end of season 5. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching me make friends with a previous enemy, then you know how YouTube works. Please do give it a like, share it around, and spread the word. I would be hugely grateful. And what do you think of The Wheel in Space? Is it a strong outing for the Cybermen, or do you agree that they are fast becoming a damp squib? Is this the weakest example of Season 5's increasingly repetitive template, or does it finish the season with a bang? And what do you think of Zoe joining the crew? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll be back here soon with a roundup of Season 5. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I will see you soon.